The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward into darkness, its crystalline walls reflecting the cold light of 1,000 alien stars. Jack Miller stood on the judgment platform, his worn xenobiologist's uniform a stark contrast to the ornate robes of the council members towering above him. Their elongated faces, with eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, stared down with what he had learned to recognize as disapproval. Representative of Earth, the High Speaker's translator hummed, its metallic tone echoing through the chamber. You stand accused of disrupting cosmic harmony through unauthorized innovation and interference with natural selection. Jack squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of the data crystal in his pocket, evidence of his success, now twisted into proof of his crimes. I saved an entire species from extinction. Through forbidden methods, another council member chimed in, their luminescent tendrils writhing in agitation. You altered their genetic structure without seeking council approval. Worse, you taught them to use tools. They were already tool users, Jack countered, his voice steady despite his rising frustration. I simply helped them adapt their existing abilities to survive their changing environment. The chamber erupted in haunting harmonics, the council's version of outraged murmurs. The High Speaker raised a limb for silence, and the sound died away like wind through ancient caves. The methods are not in question, the translator conveyed. For 50,000 cycles, the Council has preserved balance through careful regulation of technological and biological advancement. Your species has been granted observer status for barely 3 cycles, yet you persistently challenge our foundations. Jack's jaw tightened. The dying faces of the Meridians flashed through his mind. A species of gentle sculptors who had been slowly suffocating as their atmosphere changed. A simple genetic modification, borrowed from Earth's own evolutionary history, had given them the ability to process the new atmospheric composition. They lived. They thrived. And now he stood trial for it. Execution has been proposed. The High Speaker continued, causing the human ambassadors in the gallery to surge forward in protest. However, in recognition of your species' youth and unique perspective, we offer an alternative. A hologram blazed to life in the center of the chamber, displaying a world shrouded in eternal twilight. Purple-hued forests of crystalline vegetation covered its surface, and strange bioluminescent patterns shifted across its atmosphere. Nexus 9. Another council member spoke, their translator giving the words an almost gleeful tone. A world where evolution has crafted the ultimate apex predator. The Shadow Maws rule this domain, and they do not suffer intruders. Jack studied the hologram, his xenobiologist's mind already cataloging details. You're offering exile instead of execution. We offer truth, the High Speaker's words reverberated. Humanity claims that innovation and adaptation are strengths, not weaknesses. Nexus 9 will prove otherwise. 37 species have attempted to study or tame the Shadow Moss. All have failed. Their remains enrich the crystal forests. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just punishment. It was an experiment. Him against their perfect predator, with humanity's philosophy hanging in the balance. Should you survive one planetary cycle, the High Speaker continued, you may return with your findings. However, none have lasted more than 7 rotations. The Shadow Maws are thorough. Jack stepped forward, his boots ringing against the crystalline platform. And if I accept this challenge, then your crimes are commuted, and humanity maintains its observer status. Refuse, and your species' petition for full council membership is permanently denied. Jack closed his eyes, remembering the faces of the Meridian children playing in their renewed atmosphere. Sometimes survival required breaking the rules. Sometimes the impossible simply needed a new perspective. I accept, he declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. The High Speaker's outer membrane rippled, their version of a satisfied smile. Then let it be recorded. In 20 rotations, you will be transported to Nexus 9. May your species' vaunted adaptability serve you well in your final days. As the guards led him away, Jack caught fragments of conversation from the council members. Wasteful. Predictable. They never learn. But Jack Miller smiled. After all, humanity had a long history of turning certain death into something unprecedented. The council thought they were disposing of a problem. He intended to show them just how problematic humanity could be. The drop pod punched through Nexus 9's atmosphere like a meteor, its heat shields glowing purple against the perpetual twilight. Jack gripped the harness as the pod shuddered, watching crystalline storm clouds whip past the viewport. The council hadn't bothered with a proper landing ship, just a reinforced capsule barely large enough for one person and essential supplies. Warning. Atmospheric anomaly detected. The pod's AI chirped moments before something massive struck the hull. The impact sent the capsule spinning, and Jack caught a glimpse of what looked like floating jellyfish, trailing electrical charges through the clouds. Wonderful, he muttered, activating manual controls. Deadly predators on the ground, living thunderstorms in the sky. The pod's stabilizers screamed as he fought for control. Through the chaos, his marine training kicked in. He had one shot at this landing. The difference between starting his exile with functional equipment or scattered wreckage. Crystal trees materialized through the twilight haze, their translucent branches refracting what little light filtered through the clouds. Jack yanked the controls, barely clearing the first row of crystalline giants. The pod clipped a branch, sending geometric shards exploding across his viewport before the emergency foam sealed the cracks. Impact came seconds later. The pod bounced once, twice, then carved a trench through phosphorescent undergrowth before slamming into a fallen crystal trunk. Emergency systems deployed, filling the cabin with shock-absorbing gel as Jack's world went dark. He came to with the pod's systems beeping urgently about external pressure changes. The gel had already receded, leaving him damp but intact. Jack ran a quick self-diagnostic. Bruised ribs, minor whiplash, but nothing broken. The council might have wanted him dead, but they'd at least given him a fighting chance. The pod's hatch released with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Jack's first breath of Nexus 9's air was surprisingly sweet, carrying hints of something like mint and ozone. He hauled himself out, combat knife already drawn, and surveyed his surroundings. The crystal forest towered above him, its branches creating a cathedral-like canopy that filtered the dim light into rainbow patterns on the ground. Bioluminescent moss carpeted everything, pulsing softly with his movements. His xenobiologist's mind was already cataloging details. The crystalline structures weren't actually trees, but some kind of silicon-based life form, growing in geometric patterns that defied Earth botany. A sound like whale song echoed through the forest, but distorted, deeper, with harmonics that made his teeth ache. Jack froze, every nerve screaming danger. He'd studied the council's sparse files on shadow moths during the 20-day journey. They hunted by sound, using the crystal forest like a massive resonance chamber. The trees around him began to vibrate, creating overlapping tones. Jack quickly unpacked his survival gear, knowing he had minutes at most. The council had given him the basics: water purifier, emergency rations, basic medical supplies, and a research tablet. Everything else would have to come from the environment. Another call echoed, closer this time. Jack activated his tablet's recording function and spoke quietly. Nexus 9, Day 1. The shadow moths appear to use the crystalline structures for echolocation, possibly like Earth's sperm whales using sonar. The entire forest might be one giant biological sound system. Movement caught his eye, a shadow flowing between the crystal trunks, too smooth to be natural. Jack's hand tightened on his knife as he glimpsed a piece of his hunter, iridescent scales that seemed to bend light, powerful muscles rippling beneath. The creature was massive, easily 3 times the size of an earth tiger. Subject appears to be testing my awareness. Jack continued recording, backing slowly toward a cluster of smaller crystals. Hunting pattern suggests high intelligence. Not just stalking, it's studying me. The shadow paused. For a moment, Jack saw eyes gleaming in the twilight. Not the mindless predator eyes he'd expected, but something worse. Something calculating. Then the forest erupted into song, crystal towers resonating at frequencies that made his vision blur. The hunt had begun, and Jack Miller was about to discover exactly why no one survived their first week on Nexus 9. 3 days into his exile, Jack woke to find a dead creature carefully arranged outside his crystal cave shelter. The carcass resembled a 6-legged deer made of living glass, its crystalline antlers shattered. He studied it from the safety of his position, noting the precise bite marks and deliberate placement. Day 3, he recorded, keeping his voice low. The Shadow Maw's behavior continues to defy conventional predator patterns. This is the second gift left at my shelter. The kills are clean, strategic, and deliberately displayed. Jack had survived the first 72 hours through a combination of marine training and xenobiological insight. The Shadow Maw could have killed him 6 times over, but instead it orchestrated near misses and displays of power. During his second night, it had herded him away from a patch of crystalline fungi that his sensors later revealed as highly toxic. "It's not hunting me," he continued, checking his makeshift perimeter alarms, strings of crystal chimes that would resonate at specific frequencies when disturbed. "It's evaluating me, testing my intelligence, my adaptability, maybe even my worth." A low harmonic thrummed through the forest. Jack had learned to read these vibrations. This one carried no hunting overtones. The Shadow Maw was announcing its presence, waiting to see his response. Time to test his theory. Jack pulled out his research tablet and placed it on a flat crystal surface. He'd spent hours studying Earth's history of animal domestication, particularly early human interactions with wolves. If he was right about the Shadow Maw's intelligence, traditional predator-prey dynamics wouldn't apply. He began arranging bioluminescent moss in careful patterns, simple geometric shapes that no natural process could create. The moss pulsed beneath his touch, its light casting soft blue patterns on the crystal trees. Initiating contact experiment, he recorded, using mathematical sequences to demonstrate intelligence, starting with the Fibonacci spiral, a pattern found in natural growth across multiple worlds. The forest fell silent as he worked. Through the crystal trunks, he caught glimpses of his observer, larger than he'd first estimated, with scales that shifted color like oil on water. The creature moved with impossible grace for its size, each motion calculated and precise. When Jack finished the spiral, he stepped back and waited. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, with deliberate slowness, the Shadow Maw emerged into the clearing. Jack's breath caught. Seeing it fully for the first time, he understood why the Council believed these creatures untamable. The Shadow Maw combined the deadly grace of a big cat with something distinctly alien, its elongated body covered in iridescent scales that rippled with bioluminescent patterns, multiple eyes, arranged in a pattern suggesting optimal depth perception, studied him with unsettling intelligence. The creature examined his moss spiral, head tilting in a surprisingly familiar gesture of curiosity. Then, with movements so precise they seemed impossible for its massive claws, it began to modify the pattern. Jack watched in astonishment as the Shadow Maw extended the Fibonacci sequence, adding the next 3 iterations with perfect mathematical accuracy. But it didn't stop there. The creature began incorporating its own bioluminescent markings into the display, creating a complex interplay of light and geometry that put Jack's simple spiral to shame. "Incredible," he whispered, recording everything. "It's not just recognizing the pattern, it's enhancing it, communicating through mathematical art." The Council completely misunderstood these beings. They're not just apex predators. They're intelligence hunters. They don't want prey. They want peers. The Shadow Maw finished its work and stepped back, its scales rippling with new patterns. It waited, watching him with what Jack could only interpret as expectation. He laughed softly, earning a curious head tilt from the massive predator. "The Council sent me here to die," he told it, already planning his next mathematical offering. Instead, they might have just introduced humanity to the most incredible first contact opportunity in galactic history. The crystal forest hummed with new frequencies as Jack began his response, adding Earth's prime numbers to the growing mathematical dialogue. The hunt was over. The dance of minds had begun. The storm came without warning. Jack had been tracking the Shadow Maw's mathematical responses through his tablet when the crystal forest erupted into screaming harmonics. Above, the twilight sky transformed into a churning mass of purple lightning. "Emergency log," he shouted over the rising wind. Electrical storm triggering resonance in the crystal structures. Frequency approaching. His words cut off as a massive crystalline branch exploded overhead, sending razor-sharp shards raining down. The Shadow Maw's warning call came too late. Jack dove for cover, but the chain reaction had begun. The forest's natural resonance, amplified by the storm, was shattering the largest crystal trees. Each explosion triggered more, creating a deadly cascade of crystalline shrapnel. Through the chaos, he heard something different, a sound he'd never heard from his alien observer before. Pain. Jack sprinted toward the cry, ducking under falling crystal spears and leaping over spreading cracks in the ground. He found the Shadow Maw trapped beneath a fallen crystal trunk, its iridescent scales dulled with phosphorescent blood. The creature's multiple eyes locked onto him, but there was no hostility now, only awareness and something that might have been resignation. "Don't move," Jack said, knowing the creature had learned to understand his speech patterns. The crystal trunk had shattered on impact, its edges wickedly sharp. One wrong move could sever something vital. The Shadow Maw rumbled softly, its bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly. More crystal trees were failing around them as the storm intensified. They had minutes at most. Jack pulled out his medkit and combat knife, mind racing through xenobiological principles. "I know your biology is silicon-based," he told the creature, keeping his voice steady as he assessed the damage. "Your blood crystallizes on contact with air, an evolutionary defense mechanism. But right now, that's going to make this harder." The creature's eyes tracked his movements as he cut away fragments of crystal tree. Its blood was already forming intricate geometric patterns where it fell, beautiful but potentially lethal if it crystallized around the wound. "My turn to solve a puzzle," Jack said, pulling supplies from his kit. The council had included basic medical equipment, but nothing designed for silicon-based life. He'd have to improvise. The storm's intensity peaked, purple lightning striking the crystal forest in stroboscopic bursts. Jack worked through it all, using his tablet's scanner to map the creature's internal structure while he carefully lifted crystal shards away from its flesh. "Your circulatory system is incredible," he murmured, falling into the habit of narrating his observations. "The crystallization pattern isn't random. It's following mathematical principles similar to your communication displays. You're not just using math to think. It's built into your biology." The Shadow Maw's low rumble seemed to agree. Its patterns were steadying now, pain giving way to curiosity as it watched him work. Jack combined the medical foam from his kit with crystallized samples of the creature's own blood, creating a silicon-based sealant for the worst wounds. The work was delicate, requiring perfect precision despite the chaos around them. One slip could send crystal shards into vital organs. Hours passed as the storm gradually subsided. Jack's hands were shaking from exhaustion and countless small cuts, but the last wound was finally sealed. He sat back, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all. The council would lose their minds if they could see this, a human performing emergency surgery on their perfect predator. The Shadow Maw rose carefully, testing its healed limbs. Its bioluminescent patterns had shifted to entirely new configurations, ones Jack had never seen before. The creature moved closer, its massive head lowering to eye level. For a long moment, they studied each other. Then, with deliberate gentleness, the Shadow Maw pressed its forehead against Jack's shoulder, a gesture of trust that defied every council prediction about these beings. "Eclipse," Jack said softly, reaching up to touch the creature's scaled neck. "That's what I'll call you. Because you just proved that even the darkest expectations can hide something brilliant." The newly named Eclipse rumbled in approval, her pattern synchronizing with the glow of Jack's tablet. Around them, the crystal forest began to sing with new harmonics, not the hunting songs of before, but something closer to Earth's whale songs, a celebration of understanding between species. And somewhere in the council chambers, sensors recorded the impossible. Their perfect predator had chosen a packmate. Field log, day 27. Jack whispered into his tablet, crouched behind a crystalline boulder. "Eclipse has been teaching me to hunt using the forest's resonance patterns. More importantly, she's teaching me why." Ahead, his shadow-maw companion stalked silently through the purple twilight, her iridescent scales shifting to match the ambient light. They were tracking a herd of crystal grazers, the deer-like creatures that had been Eclipse's first gift. But this wasn't a simple hunt. Jack watched as Eclipse deliberately pressed her claws against specific crystal formations, creating complex harmonics that rippled through the forest. The herd responded, moving away from a patch of seemingly normal ground. "Fascinating," Jack recorded. "She's not hunting them. She's herding them away from danger." The crystal grazers were moving toward a field of dormant crystal spores. If they had disturbed those spores... He paused as Eclipse signaled him with a pattern of bioluminescent pulses. "Hold that thought. Showtime." Jack moved forward, mimicking Eclipse's careful movements. After 3 weeks of practice, he'd learned to read the crystal forest's subtle vibrations through his boots. Each formation had its own resonance frequency, creating a complex web of sound that Eclipse's species used for both communication and navigation. A crystal grazer bull turned toward them, its crystalline antlers catching the dim light. But instead of fleeing, it dipped its head in what looked remarkably like acknowledgement. Eclipse rumbled softly, her patterns shifting to display calming blues and greens. "They're not just prey animals," Jack realized, speaking quietly. "This is a symbiotic relationship. The shadow maws protect the herds from environmental hazards, and in return..." He trailed off as Eclipse demonstrated, approaching the bull with deliberate grace. The crystal grazer lowered its head, allowing Eclipse to carefully break off a small section of its continuously growing antlers. The crystalline material contained concentrated minerals essential to the shadow maw's biology. The council completely misunderstood, Jack continued, excitement creeping into his voice. They saw apex predators because they were looking for violence, but the shadow maws are ecosystem engineers. They maintain the balance of this entire crystal forest network. Eclipse returned to his side, offering him the crystal shard. Jack accepted it carefully, noting how the broken end was already beginning to regenerate. "This explains why you were alone when I arrived. You saw the same patterns I did." The council's observation posts were disrupting the crystal forest's resonance fields. "You tried to protect your territory by driving them away." The shadow maw's patterns pulsed in confirmation. She had recognized Jack as different from the start. A being who observed before acting, who sought to understand rather than control. Now she was showing him the true complexity of her world. Together, they followed the herd's movement through the twilight forest. Jack had learned to move almost silently now, his feet finding the stable points between crystal formations. Eclipse had learned to accommodate his slower pace, adjusting her hunting patterns to complement his human limitations. "Watch this," Jack told his tablet, pulling out a tool he'd fashioned from smaller crystal shards. He pressed it against a crystal trunk and dragged it carefully, creating a specific frequency. The crystal grazers perked up, recognizing the sound as one of Eclipse's warning signals. Eclipse rumbled in approval, her patterns displaying what Jack had learned to recognize as pride. She demonstrated a more complex sequence, showing him how to layer different frequencies to create more nuanced messages. "The implications are staggering," Jack recorded, trying the new sequence. "The shadow maws haven't just evolved to survive in this environment. They've evolved to nurture it. Every hunting pattern, Every territorial display serves the larger purpose of maintaining ecological balance. The crystal forest hummed around them as twilight deepened into night. Jack watched Eclipse guide the herd toward safer grazing grounds, her movements a perfect blend of power and precision. She was teaching him more than just survival. She was showing him an entirely new way of seeing the universe. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Jack began to formulate a plan. The Council had sent him here to die, to prove humanity's weakness. Instead, they'd given him the key to revolutionizing galactic understanding of ecological engineering. First, though, he had a lot more to learn about being a proper Shadow Maw packmate. The crystal forest's warning came as a change in pitch, a subtle shift in harmonics that made Eclipse's scales ripple with alarm. Jack looked up from his tablet where he'd been documenting crystal grazer migration patterns, immediately alert to his companion's tension. "Multiple ships entering atmosphere," he recorded, voice low as Eclipse pressed against his side. Not the usual automated observation drones. Larger vessels, military grade according to my sensors. The Council's getting impatient. Eclipse's warning rumble vibrated through the crystal trees. Through their bond, Jack understood her concern. The ships were disrupting the forest's natural resonance patterns, confusing the herds they'd spent weeks guiding away from dangerous areas. "They're not here to observe anymore," Jack muttered, packing his equipment. 60 days of survival must have rattled them. Can't have their perfect predator playing nice with the exile, can we? The first hunter pods streaked through the twilight sky like falling stars, their entry vectors precise and coordinated. Jack counted 6 before the crystal canopy obscured his view. Eclipse's patterns shifted to deep reds and violets, colors of threat and protection. "No," Jack told her firmly, reading her intent. "We don't fight them." That's exactly what they expect, what they want. Proof that this partnership is based on violence. He smiled, patting her scaled neck. "Let's show them something they've never seen instead." The hunters deployed with military precision, their crystalline armor designed to blend with the forest. But Jack had learned to read this world through Eclipse's senses. Every footstep sent ripples through the crystal network. Every movement disrupted the natural harmony of their environment. "They're good," Jack recorded, as he and Eclipse moved silently through the underbrush. Council must have sent their elite hunters, specialized equipment, too, designed to handle a Shadow Maw's natural weapons. But they're missing the point entirely. Eclipse rumbled in agreement, her patterns shifting to match the forest's bioluminescence. They weren't running away. They were positioning themselves to observe. Jack had learned that true power in this world came from understanding, not force. The hunters' first mistake came quickly. Their formation drove them toward a field of crystal spores, the same kind Jack and Eclipse had steered the grazers away from days earlier. Through the resonating crystal trees, Jack heard their leader give orders in the Council's harmonic language. "Maintain pursuit pattern. The beast will break cover eventually." "Wrong on both counts," Jack whispered, reaching for his makeshift crystal tools. "Eclipse isn't a beast, and we're not the ones who need help." He pressed the tools against a crystal trunk, recreating the warning sequence Eclipse had taught him. The sound rippled through the forest, a clear danger signal to any creature that knew how to listen. The hunters paused, weapons ready. But the warning wasn't meant for them. A herd of crystal grazers burst from the underbrush, panicked by the signal. They charged straight through the hunters' formation, forcing them to scatter. Several hunters stumbled into the spore field, their crystalline armor immediately beginning to corrode. "Now," Jack signaled to Eclipse. She moved with liquid grace, her massive form somehow gentle as she herded the confused hunters away from danger. Jack emerged from cover, hands raised, and called out, "Your armor's compromised. The spores will breach it in minutes. Let us help." The hunters raised their weapons, but their leader hesitated. Through their deteriorating armor, they could see Eclipse positioning herself not to attack, but to guard their escape route. Jack pulled supplies from his pack, the silicon-based sealant he'd developed while treating Eclipse. "You came to eliminate a dangerous partnership," he said calmly, approaching with the medical supplies. "Instead, you're about to become evidence of why it works." Eclipse's patterns rippled with what Jack now recognized as amusement. Around them, the crystal forest harmonics shifted back toward balance, welcoming these new players into its ancient dance of survival. The hunter leader lowered their weapons slowly, head tilted in a gesture Jack had come to recognize as confused curiosity. "You are not what we expected," they said through their translator. Jack smiled, beginning to treat their armor damage. "That's the whole point. Now, would you like to learn what this world is really about?" Field log, day 65. Jack recorded, watching Eclipse demonstrate proper crystal resonance techniques to 3 fascinated hunters. "Our would-be executioners have become students. Turns out nearly dying from crystal spores makes people more open-minded." The hunter leader, who called themselves Nexus Handler First Rank Shen, approached Jack with their crystalline helmet retracted. Their elongated features showed what he'd learned to recognize as excitement. The mathematical patterns in the creatures, in Eclipse's communications, Shen said through their translator. They match ancient formulas our archaeologists discovered in dead worlds. We never understood their purpose until now. Jack nodded, watching Eclipse guide the hunter's hands to specific points on a crystal trunk. "Because you were looking for weapons or tools. But these patterns are something far more fundamental. They're the language of ecological balance itself." Above them, purple lightning crawled through the twilight clouds. Once, such a storm would have sent the hunters scrambling for shelter. Now they simply adjusted their positions, using Eclipse's taught techniques to read the forest's warning harmonics. The Council believes this world proves the superiority of regulated evolution. Shen observed, their translator struggling to convey the complex concept. But we have learned more about true adaptation in 5 days than in 50 cycles of controlled observation. A distant cry echoed through the crystal forest. One of the junior hunters had found something. Jack and Eclipse moved in perfect synchronization. Following the sound, they found the hunter crouched by a newly emerged crystal formation, its geometric patterns unlike anything they'd seen before. "Careful," Jack warned, but Eclipse was already producing specific harmonic patterns. The crystal formation responded, its surface rippling like liquid glass. "Remarkable. The forest is actually accelerating its growth cycles, adapting to our presence." Shen's team gathered around, their scientific instruments recording everything. But Jack noticed how they automatically positioned themselves in a protective circle, unconsciously mimicking Shadowmaw pack hunting formations. "Your transformation is more complete than you realize," he told them, smiling. "You're not just studying the ecosystem anymore. You're becoming part of it." Eclipse rumbled in agreement, her patterns displaying colors of acceptance. She'd recognized the hunters' change in behavior days ago, watching them shift from rigid military precision to fluid, adaptive movements. The crystal formation suddenly burst upward, sprouting into a new type of crystal tree. Its branches grew in perfect mathematical sequences, each layer building on the previous in a demonstration of natural engineering that put the Council's controlled evolution to shame. "The Council sent us to eliminate an aberration," Shen said, their translator crackling with emotion. "Instead, we have become part of one. They will not understand. Then we'll make them understand." Jack activated his tablet's holographic display, showing the weeks of collected data. "Eclipse hasn't just taught us how to survive here. She's shown us how to thrive. The Shadowmaws aren't apex predators. They're custodians of something far more precious." The hunters gathered closer as Jack explained his plan. Above them, Eclipse's patterns rippled with approval as crystal spores danced in the electrical storm like falling stars. "The Council wants proof that their way is right," Jack continued. "Instead, we'll give them proof that there's a better way. Not control, but cooperation. Not dominance, but harmony." Shen's team straightened, their postures shifting from military rigidity to something more fluid, more aligned with the forest's natural rhythms. "We were prepared to die completing our mission," their leader said. "Instead, We will live to change its purpose. Jack reached up to touch Eclipse's scaled neck, feeling the deep rumble of her satisfaction. The council thought they were setting a trap, he told his tablet. Instead, they created a revolution. One world at a time, one mind at a time. We're going to show the galaxy what real adaptation looks like. Eclipse's patterns burst into brilliant colors, and the crystal forest sang with new harmonies as hunters and hunted moved together through the endless twilight, preparing for their greatest challenge yet, teaching the council themselves how to adapt. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Jack Miller strode through its crystalline doors. He no longer wore the worn xenobiologist's uniform of his exile, but rather a sleek suit integrated with living crystal, its patterns shifting in harmony with his movements. Behind him walked Eclipse, her massive form somehow more magnificent in the council's austere chamber than in her native twilight forest. But they weren't alone. The entire hunter team, led by Shen, flanked them in formation. Each wore modified crystal armor that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns matching Eclipse's, a visual declaration of their transformed allegiance. Interesting. The High Speaker's translator hummed. You were meant to prove humanity's weakness. Instead, you return with our elite hunters corrupted by your chaos. Jack smiled, touching the data crystal hanging from his neck. Corrupted? No. Evolved. Just as you wanted, though perhaps not in the way you expected. Eclipse moved forward, her scales rippling with complex mathematical patterns that made the chamber's crystal walls resonate in harmony. Several council members shifted uncomfortably as their carefully controlled environment responded to her presence. We've spent 90 days studying the true nature of Nexus 9, Jack announced, activating his holographic displays. The chamber filled with scrolling data, three-dimensional models of crystal formations, and recorded footage of shadow maw hunting patterns. Your perfect predators aren't what you thought they were. They're engineers, guardians, the culmination of natural evolution's answer to maintaining planetary equilibrium. Impossible. Another council member buzzed. We have observed their hunting patterns for generations. They are creatures of pure instinct, nothing more. Shen stepped forward, their translator projecting clearly. With respect, honored ones, we were equally wrong. The shadow maws don't hunt for dominance. They hunt for balance. Every pattern we mistook for aggression is actually part of a complex system of ecological maintenance. The chamber erupted in harmonic disagreement, but Jack was ready. He nodded to Eclipse, who pressed her claws against the chamber's floor in precise sequences. The crystal walls began to sing with familiar frequencies, and suddenly, impossibly, crystal growths began sprouting from the pristine floor. Stop this abomination, the High Speaker commanded, but the hunters moved to protect the growing crystal formation. Watch, Jack said quietly, his voice carrying through the chaos. Really watch, and see what your perfect predator actually is. The crystal growth blossomed into a miniature recreation of Nexus 9's forest. Eclipse's patterns guided its development, demonstrating in minutes what would take years in nature. The council members fell silent as they witnessed the complex interplay of mathematics, biology, and engineering in every branch and pattern. Your fundamental assumption was wrong, Jack explained, walking through the growing crystal garden. You thought evolution was about creating perfect killing machines, but true evolutionary perfection isn't about destruction. It's about creation, balance, harmony. Eclipse rumbled in agreement, her patterns now synchronized with the chamber's natural resonance. Some of the younger council members were leaning forward, their outer membranes rippling with poorly concealed fascination. We're not here to challenge your authority, Jack continued. We're here to show you what happens when you let go of control long enough to learn. These patterns Eclipse is showing you. They appear in the ruins of dozens of dead worlds in your archives. They're not weapons schematics. They're maintenance manuals left by ancient custodian species. The High Speaker raised a limb for silence, studying the still-growing crystal formation. And what would you have us do with this revelation? Jack smiled, reaching up to rest a hand on Eclipse's scaled neck. Learn, adapt, evolve. The galaxy doesn't need more perfect predators or controlled experiments. It needs understanding, partnership. He gestured to the hunters, standing proud in their transformed armor. Your own people have already begun to change. The question is, will the Council lead this evolution or be left behind by it? Eclipse's patterns shifted to brilliant, hopeful colors as the chamber's crystals sang with new possibilities. The Council members looked at each other, then at the human who had returned from certain death with not just survival, but wisdom. Perhaps, the High Speaker said finally, their translator humming with something like wonder, it is time for the Council itself to adapt. And in that moment, as human, Shadowmaw, hunters, and Council stood together in a forest of newly grown crystal, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what impossible thing this strange partnership would achieve next.